Hey everybody, it's Kaylee and welcome back to my Stardew Treats series. If you aren't familiar with this, I have a wheel where I have a bunch of Stardew characters on it, and I bake a treat based off of who I get and their likes or loves. Let's just get straight to the point and spin. So I knew right off the bat when I started the series that the kids were going to be probably the most difficult. I don't really have a relationship with any of the kids, and the most I've ever given Vincent are apples and an occasional snail. But Vincent might be more significant to those that go after Sam, since Vincent is Sam's little brother. So let's figure out what we do know about Vincent. Vincent is the son of Kent and Jody, and like I said, the brother of Sam. Vincent seems to be good friends with Jazz, since they are both taught by Penny, and I think just like a typical little boy, he likes dirtier things like playing out in the mud, playing out in the rain, bugs, all that kind of thing. Let's take a look at his loved gifts. I knew I wasn't going to have a lot to work with, but the only foods that he likes are grapes and the pink cake. And I don't know about you, but grapes are not a very common food that I put in my baked goods. As you can see here, I went with the pink cake, and I knew I was going to have to make one of these eventually because a lot of characters really like the pink cake. And I was really excited about this. I wanted to make one that I felt would be the perfect size for Vincent. I dug up my whoopie pie pan and I thought it would make the perfect blueprint to make little cake layers. If you aren't familiar with what a whoopie pie is, it is basically 2 cake layers filled with frosting in the middle. It's like a cake sandwich. Whoopie pies were always something that my mom was super into because she really likes frosting. So my goal was to use the extra batter to make a whoopie pie for my mom, which is exactly what I ended up doing. Now, going into more detail on the flavor of the cake, in order to make a pink cake, you have to use pink melons. As far as I know, pink melons aren't a thing, and maybe they are, but they're nowhere near me. I'm not sure how I would even work with them, so I just decided to do vanilla. I mean, I am aware of certain kinds of pink melons, but I don't think those were the ones that they were referring to. Anyway, I really quickly finished scooping my batter into the whoopie pan, and I ended up putting these in the oven for a little bit more than 10 minutes. They took a very short amount of time to cook since they were so small. Now it's time for the buttercream. Buttercream and I have a really good relationship when it comes to me eating it, but a not so good relationship when it comes to me trying to make it. After a bunch of research, I would like to share a few things that I learned about it to maybe help somebody out there that is also struggling. First tip I learned: soften your butter overnight and whip it and whip it and whip it until it turns white. I'm talking like white. It'll be white and fluffy and so smooth. Next tip I learned is to always sift your powdered sugar. I didn't fully understand why at first, because in my mind powdered sugar is so fine, why does it need to be sifted? When making buttercream frosting, if powdered sugar is not sifted, while it mixes, it can crystallize into these little clumpy balls. Thankfully, after I learned that, I no longer have clumpy balls.
What?
Another tip I have is to add your salt and your vanilla last. Literally look at how pretty my buttercream frosting is. The very last tip I have is that when whipping your buttercream frosting, it often can create a lot of air, which is good. However, when you're piping or spreading on your buttercream, those air pockets become very visible and very annoying. So it's good to mix your buttercream with your spatula really well, compressing it down to the bottom of the bowl to get rid of all those air bubbles. My pretty little layers have come out of the oven, and unfortunately they still do have a hump, so I'm just evening all of them out right now. Funnily enough, I ended up evening out the most funky looking ones first, which had to be set aside for the whoopie pies, so there was no point of me evening them out. I couldn't use them because they were an odd size and my cake would have ended up looking like a barrel or a cone. Another tip I would like to add is specifically when putting frosting into a piping bag. A lot of air can get trapped, so it's great to scrape down your buttercream down to the very bottom and chop it up, almost like you're chopping up an onion. Holy crap, brand new angle! You chop it up by not actually using a knife, but using one of these things. I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but this is my great-grandmother's and I use it for literally anything. Anytime I bake, I use it. These can be used to cut bread in half. They can be used to scrape down the side of the bowl. They can be used to put frosting in a piping bag. They can be used to scrape off your counter, get all that gunk off. Anyway, if you don't have one, I highly recommend that you get one. I would imagine that they're pretty cheap. So since I'm adding all kinds of tips into this video, let's talk about tips when it comes to knowing whether or not a cake is done. You often hear in the baking community that anything is really done when the toothpick comes out clean. I feel like that's a pretty good statement for most things, but there are exceptions. I would consider cake to be an exception to this rule, but not like by a major margin or anything. What I mean is when you put a toothpick into your cake, ideally you want a couple crumbs to come with the toothpick. Now when I say crumbs, I mean like 1 or 2. I am not at all talking about wet batter. This is a good teller of whether or not your cake is still kind of moist, and it does bake just the tiniest bit when you take it out of the oven. Back to the frosting. I'm chronically ill and my arthritis was so pissed at me for frosting the cake this long. And for somebody that's not very good at frosting, I would say I got it pretty smooth. It's time to try to perfectly place those 8 little sprinkles that you see in the game. I have baking tweezers for this exact purpose, but because of how much pain I was in, I didn't gaff at this point and I just raw dogged it. I think that Vincent, or really any kid, would like this cake. It was a little too sweet for my taste, but I think I just added too much buttercream and not enough jam, but overall it was really good. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you're on YouTube. Here's how the cake turned out officially. Please like, comment, all that, blah, 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 and I hope you have a great day.